Today on The Independent, it's kickoff time season. Pete and I break down some of Notre Dame's early season schedule and its start times. We also talk about Pete's story on Matt Jansen on The Athletic, along with salary information on Marcus Freeman and other members of Notre Dame's athletic department.
Welcome to the latest episode of The Independent. I'm Pete Sampson, joined as my co-host, Matt Fortuna. And Matt, I want to get into all the stuff you said in our intro there. However, you being in Chicago put you closer to some Notre Dame action than me being in South Bend last weekend when Pete Bevacqua was in town to talk to an alumni club. I did not make it. You did. And I think that your experience with Bevacqua mirrors pretty much everyone else's that I've come in contact, donors, people work at the university, coaches, agents, where he is frankly just kind of an easy guy you can see why he'd be a pretty easy guy to get behind if you're a Notre Dame football coach, if you're a Notre Dame administrator, or if you're just a Notre Dame fan who's looking to make a donation to his favorite university.
Yeah, he spoke at the Rockney Club Gala last Friday down at RPM Events. Shout out to Steve Sante and Mike Fletcher, friends of the pod, who ran a great event that night and had Pete Bevacqua speak. And first, I met him briefly in passing at one of the playoff meetings, probably shortly after he took the job about a year ago. But just hearing him speak in person. Hearing him speak, obviously, to a Notre Dame crowd, it was, I don't know if refreshing is the right word, but like there was no middle ground with him. I felt like he was very easygoing. Everyone was behind him and his message. And he said there what he has said in other interviews since taking the job, which is we need to win a national championship. And I know in some ways that goes without saying, but you really feel it when he says it. The Brian Kelly and others would always say the word the line graduating champions and other phrases similar. This felt like a lot more than a slogan. This felt like we're in it to win it. And all the actions the University of Notre Dame is taking with Notre Dame football within the last year or so have absolutely, shown that the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if we've ever said it on a podcast, but certainly maybe in our pre-pod banter sometimes, like the whole graduating champions felt a little too much into graduating and not enough into the champions part. And the investment in coaches, the investment in facilities, I think sort of gets to more of the champions part. And look, Robeck did a lot of the legwork here on the way out, but to set Marcus Freeman up in a position where he's got a chance to really go for it. But I think that Bevacqua's energy, and I don't know if I would call him Notre Dame's first fan athletic director, but I can't think of somebody who came in with like that predisposition to like, I love Notre Dame football in like a almost unhealthy, passionate way. Like I'm sure Bevacqua at some point has been on a Notre Dame message board just as like a Notre Dame alum because he's that passionate about the football program. I remember talking to Rob Hyland, producer at NBC, and he was like, Bevacqua would know all the recruiting stuff. You could not be in a meeting for more than 10 minutes with him without Notre Dame football coming up. I think that passion and energy is going to play well around Notre Dame, as long as they're winning. But I could see Bevacqua going to maybe different lengths to help football. And like those different lengths, notably NIL, are what it's going to take. And I think Notre Dame's willing to go there. They've been much more aggressive in the NIL space than I think a lot of Notre Dame fans realize. But you can always be more aggressive in that space. And I think that Bevacqua will probably help Notre Dame get there.
Yeah, he told the story of his father being a graduate, how this is the only school he applied to, how his summer vacations were driving to Notre Dame with his dad from New York. And handing out snacks to players, off the practice field. That's how kind of neurotic and intense his fandom was. And you can certainly see that through his actions and what he said ever since. He had a funny story. Excuse me. Excuse me. He had a funny story about Lou Holtz. There's a line, almost a throwaway line in Bevacqua's bio about being a punter at Notre Dame. And I've always been curious about that because that was news to people I know who played during that era.
Yeah, nobody really seemed to remember Pete Bevacqua, punter.
And basically, he said he had back surgery in high school. He couldn't really do a whole lot, football wise, or any walk on dreams he had were pretty much fizzled. But he said something to the effect of he was helping one of the punters out, in the offseason, throwing the ball back to him, punting the ball back to him, and basically tried out and made it. I want to say it was for 1 or 2 semesters. It wasn't a long. You could tell the Notre Dame fandom in him that like he went to these lengths to be a part of the program, knowing he was never going to actually contribute. I think the line he said was, "I made Rudy look like Montana." Sounds about right. But he tells a story of how when he's at USGA, he's at the U.S. Open in Oakmont, in Pittsburgh, and one of the event organizers was a Notre Dame graduate who was meeting Lou Holtz that night, and he said something to the effect of, tell him you're with me, or I want to hear if he remembers me. I was only there on his team for a semester or so, and he comes back and he said, "Oh, I mentioned I was with Pete Bevacqua, and Coach Holtz said, Pete Bevacqua, heart of a lion." And for years he wore that as a badge of honor. Lou Holtz not only remembered him, he said he had the heart of a lion.
It was like on his LinkedIn page or something.
Husband, father, lifetime learner.
Yeah.
Heart of a lion. A fast forward years later, he sits down with Lou Holtz and he says, I just wanted to thank you for saying I had a heart of a lion. Like that meant a lot to me. I wear that as a badge of honor. And he said, Lou Holtz stops and says, "Pete, I say that about everyone whose name I don't recognize. I can't say you're too fast because you might have been a lineman. I can't say you're too strong because you might have been a specialist. Heart of a lion can apply to anyone in any field at any time." And you could just see all the strength and courage from his face as he's retelling the story, just kind of sap out of his body, saying, "God, I wish you never told me that." So that sounds like Lou Holtz in a nutshell. So.
Yeah, I love that story. That's so good. I think that just the fan elements or the fan dynamics with Bevacqua about the summer vacations to Notre Dame from New York, giving cookies to players, like that kind of stuff. I think it matters. Is it going to matter? At A&M on Labor Day weekend, I don't know, but will it matter in sort of making sure Shields Hall looks exactly how it's supposed to look, and NIL takes steps forward, and Notre Dame is not reluctant to jump in? Like, yeah, I think it probably will matter with that kind of stuff. But it's like you had your sort of annual tax return story, and this sort of gets into like mattering and investing and priorities. And I think it sort of backs up something we've said on the show multiple times, is like Notre Dame is spending for college football coaches in a way that I don't know if they get credit for among their own fans. But Marcus Freeman at $6.7 million on his first contract as a head coach, to me, is a lot. But also, like something a year ago, which I don't know if we talked about, that Marcus Freeman defensive coordinator making 2.3. We knew Reese was around 1.9 from people close to that situation. We know Denbrock and Golden are basically on similar 4-year deals around $9 million. Like, this is a lot of money going out the door at Notre Dame for football coaches. And that, like, if I was a Notre Dame fan, I would feel very good about the level of investment that's happening here, because to me, it's at a level that I think fans don't really appreciate. But also it's like at the top, it's like at the head table of the sport. Like, they're spending like they're serious about winning a national championship. And I think sometimes, like, even like Notre Dame's own fans don't believe it. no matter how many times we say it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say like the pretense is removed, but like I do think there's part of that. I mean, I remember when Elko left for A&M as a DC after 1 year, and everyone was shocked by it. And, the fan base was outraged saying, why can't we just pay, blah, blah, blah. And I remember talking to someone at Notre Dame at the time who said, like, A&M went to a place we were, I think he used the word uncomfortable going. And that word doesn't exist anymore, I don't think. Right. Like,
yeah,
I don't think uncomfortable as it relates to salaries matters. Now you could go back a year ago and look at the Ludwig situation, and I think reasonable minds can look at that situation differently. I don't think that was Notre Dame being cheap. I think there was a breakdown in process that caught them off guard there. But I was pleasantly surprised to see Marcus Freeman's total compensation, at least for the most part, in this year's tax returns. Brian Kelly's never really made it beyond $3 million and always had the line item of, and I could pull it up here just so I quote it correctly. Quote, the last one for Kelly was, quote, during the calendar year 2021, the university made payments to an LLC owned by the head coach football, which are not reportable compensation for the purposes of Form 990. Therefore, the payments are excluded from Form 990, Part 7 and Schedule J, Part 2, end quote. There's none of that with Freeman, and you see what is probably his full, for the most part, salary there. Because even when Kelly left, obviously it was a mega deal with LSU, but there was a perception of, you're leaving Notre Dame because they're not paying you enough. And I think his salary, and we'll never really know for sure, but everything I gathered, he was close to about $8 a year at Notre Dame by the end.
Right.
Even if only about 3.5 of that would show up on tax returns. So it's not like he left for some crazy payday. He's making what, 9.5 at LSU.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's crazy, but not.
And that was like the Reese Alabama thing. Like it was, I don't want to say it was a rounding error, the difference between Notre Dame and Alabama, but like that wasn't the reason Reese left.
Reese's 3-year deal at Bama, I think, was 192021, so 2 per year. And his last year at Notre Dame total was 1886132. And again, that was his. Well, no, it was his first year under Freeman. It wasn't his first year as OC, but clearly he was going to have more responsibility as an OC for a defensive head coach. And he was kind of the one who held that whole thing together. I mean, he had one foot out the door with Kelly to LSU until Notre Dame stepped up financially and showed him that they valued him. And if Reese leaves, I don't know if Freeman gets a job, because part of the process of hiring Freeman was having stability around him in the form of Reese, in the form of Matt Balis, and so forth. It's funny, the reaction, because again, we get this information a year and a half after the fact. Like people see $6.5 million for Freeman. They see some others. They think underpaid. This was his first year salary, which was negotiated and signed probably in December of 21. At a point in time where he was named the head football coach at Notre Dame, I believe, 96 hours after Brian Kelly left. There was no search as far as other candidates who were actually interviewed for the job. Freeman, from my understanding at the time, if I recall correctly, Duke had him scheduled for an interview that week when they ended up hiring Elko. I know Illinois had done some homework on him the year prior when they hired Brett Bielema. I know Kansas had inquired about him through back channels when they ended up hiring Lance Leipold earlier that summer. But again, we're not talking about a head coach who had his pick of the litter between USC, Ohio State, LSU, and Notre Dame. Like there was not a market for Marcus Freeman head coach that week at that point in time, at least among blue bloods. So for him to get 6-7, close to it, 6-7 in year one, good on Notre Dame for showing him, we're invested in you. This isn't a first year head coach hire. For comparison's sake, I mean, Sherrone Moore just got the job at Michigan, similar circumstances, promoted from within. He's making 6. And Michigan and Notre Dame are probably operate similarly as far as, their investments in football, so to speak, financially.
Yeah.
But, the timing was what it was. It was late January. It's not like Moore was going to go anywhere other than with Harbaugh. But he was more accomplished than Freeman was at the time. He coached, he beat Ohio State, as an interim coach. He coached 4 games and ran the offense of a team that won the national championship this year. So he's making less 2 years later from Michigan than Freeman was making in year one at Notre Dame. And I think that's, helpful context as well. Certainly Lincoln Riley getting 10 that first year from USC, which we all kind of figured at the time because that's what it takes to pry an elite head coach from another blue blood. But
that's more. My laugh is more of a return on investment laugh than a like strategic.
They got the return. I mean, they're going to the Big Ten. They had the Heisman winner his first year. Forget USC football was freaking terrible before he got there. Obviously, they didn't have a great year last year. But
it was bad.
They're. I mean, I don't know how it'll be this year, but that's a program I think that's in good shape long term, and is relevant on the national and local scene there in a way it hasn't been or wasn't under Clay Helton.
Fair. That's fair enough. Yeah. They were just like a bit of a tire fire at the end of last season. And they're a fascinating team to watch out of the gate on week 1 when they play LSU in Vegas, I think.
Vegas Sunday night. But I don't know if we were tweeting about this. I was reminded of this by JJ Stankovitz, former Notre Dame beat writer for NBC Sports. When the A&M series that starts this year got announced back in, 2014, maybe 2015, Brian Kelly got asked about, what do you think of playing A&M in 10 years? And his famous quote was, I'll be sipping Mai Tais on the beach. He might be doing it at the pool in Vegas since he won't be working that night, but he will be working the next day.
He can sip a Mai Tai at Circus Sports, not a sponsor, could be, of the Independent at Stadium Swim. But yeah, that will be a fascinating week 1. Notre Dame's week 1 kickoff time, no surprise. The 7:30?
7:30 ABC triple header plus game day.
Yeah, that's a lot there. Yet another college game day, Riley Leonard, Mike Elko, Marcus Freeman mashup. Just one quarterback in a different spot, head coach in a different spot.
Well, and now you have Nick Saban interviewing one or both of the head coaches, which will be interesting.
Yeah, that's true. That'll be kind of a fun part of it as well. But yeah, that will be a scene. Are you making plans to go down to that?
I haven't booked anything yet, but I'll be there.
Okay. I have booked everything. I'm staying in College Station Friday night and Saturday night because I wanted to actually see College Station for one time only. But yeah, it's not too early to be intrigued about that one. I think just everything about the dynamic there, including I know that Action Network is not necessarily a bettable win total, but they had Notre Dame at 10.5 wins, which was tied for first nationally with, I think, Texas, Oregon, Georgia, and Ohio State. So all that was, look, Notre Dame's they're a hype trend team this year, and all of that fits into it.
Well, a lot of the mentions or replies when you tweet out, hey, game day week 1, Notre Dame A&M is, two teams that are going to be, one of these teams is going to be proven to be ridiculously too highly ranked in the preseason. And there's some truth in that because whoever loses that game will get a lot of hate and told how they were overhyped. I don't want to put Notre Dame in the same category as Texas A&M in that regard because Notre Dame's actually had a pretty damn good football program the last decade, and A&M, outside of the Johnny Manziel year, hasn't. They've always operated and paid like one, but I mean, they've not. I mean, Johnny football, at least in my lifetime, is all I can really remember as far as relevant A&M teams. It's probably the biggest mystery in the modern history of the sport why they aren't really good every year because of everything they have going for them.
A lot of reasons.
They haven't been. I think they will be. I think Mike Elko will fix what's ailing them there. I just don't know what they'll look like in his first game there.
No, they led the SEC in transfers in, and I think we're second in transfers out. I think I want to say 31 out, 28 in. I might have that reversed, but it's just it's hard for me to believe, for how good and how much of a pain Duke was for Notre Dame to play last year. It's difficult for me to believe that he will have A&M clicking any way remotely close to the way Duke had it happening that Saturday night last year.
Yeah, and not to make excuses for Notre Dame's subpar performance through 3.5 quarters there, but it was a really advantageous situational spot for Duke, right? Coming off the Ohio State game for Notre Dame.
The biggest game in Duke history.
Yeah, first game they ever for Duke. There was a lot adding to that moment that created the atmosphere and close game that ended up happening. Notre Dame's not going to be caught off guard by anything in this one. This is all the preparation is going into this game because it's the next game. I think we all expected it to be prime time. We expected game day. It was either that or Clemson, Georgia, but that's in Atlanta, and I don't see the point of them ever going to a neutral site. But I think we can all breathe easy knowing it's a night game at least, and it'll still be unbearably hot, but it won't be as unbearably hot as, say, Miami, Florida, which is playing at 3:30 that day, which I cannot believe. God bless both those programs and fan bases and coaching staffs. But yeah, I'm trying to think of, like, would you call A&M a rebuilding job? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like Syracuse.
More like a reboot job.
I'm just trying to, like, think of Scott Satterfield, Louisville, first game there. That was a rebuilding job. And they gave
that was a buzzsaw for Notre Dame for 3 quarters.
Right. And if they start the right quarterback, that's a 4-quarter game.
Yeah.
Juwan Pass, who was a turnover machine, and Lee Cunningham ended up coming in later that year. But that was probably, I don't want to say Notre Dame was overlooking them, but there's no way in the grand scheme of human nature that, like, that Notre Dame team could have taken that Louisville team as serious as this Notre Dame team will take Texas A&M.
Yeah, I mean, I think that game, not to get too far into that game, but that game, I think that Clark Lee, they weren't sure what Louisville was going to be offensively at the beginning of the game, and but once they figured out what Louisville was trying to do, the game was over. A&M, A&M feels like they're not going to try to trick Notre Dame in any way. You know how Elko likes to run their defense. It's a lot of pressures, smartly executed. I'm just not sure if A&M is going to have the personnel to do it immediately in terms of understanding what they want Elko to do. But it is kind of one of those games where you look at, I think it was Dane Brugler's, I don't know if it was a mock draft or a rank. I think it was kind of the super way too early, crazy mock draft for 2025. And there were 2 Texas A&M defensive linemen on it. And where's Notre Dame's weakness this year? It's going to be up front.
Right.
So I think that there's enough in the matchup, even though I think Notre Dame is a better built, better run program than Texas A&M. Better run, I think, maybe by a wide margin. But there are enough matchups in the game where, like, I could see where Notre Dame could run into some trouble. Mike Denbrock's going to have some problems to solve, but he will do it with the glare of game day there. And I think this is one of the great advantages of having Denbrock is I talked to, a former Notre Dame coach about Mike Denbrock recently, and he's just like, what Marcus Freeman needed was like an Al Golden of offense. And that's exactly what Mike Denbrock is. So they should have an offensive coordinator who can solve the kinds of problems that Mike Elko is going to throw at Marcus Freeman.
If I'm not mistaken, A&M tried to hire him too, right? I think that's what prompted the initial LSU extension.
You're right.
They ended up hiring Colin Klein. Connor Wegman's interesting. I mean, I believe we're exactly 100 days out from the start of the season today as we speak, but there's always like the dark horse Heisman. And I feel like he's a very trendy pick in that regard, probably based on, hype and speculation more than anything else. But he's a guy I'm interested in seeing. But yeah, no, I mean, the game day, prime time, just as we expected. It's going to be a show. The real surprising news, if you can call it that, this week for me was the Purdue game being on CBS.
I thought that was at NBC for certain.
I thought so too, but I guess they liked the Sun Bowl so much having Notre Dame on that they had to get them again. And isn't Gary Danielson isn't he a Purdue alum?
He is, I think.
Even though he was always known as the SEC kind of homer.
Yeah. Just wait till Big Ten fans get a load of him. They're like, wait a minute, perhaps you're just trumpeting the whatever league you're calling. So
that one was a little bit surprising as well. I thought for sure that'd be a primetime game.
Hey, as somebody who would love to drive there and back in the same day, I think the 3:30 kickoff is just like perfect. I couldn't ask for more. Now, if we can just get Navy and Georgia Tech to be sort of noon, so you can get 2 nights out in Atlanta and 2 nights out in New York, that'd be great too.
Bring back Georgia Tech grad and noted proud Catholic Harrison Bucker to do the coin toss.
Oh,
Notre Dame, Georgia Tech on that one.
Yeah, I don't know if we may have to have a conversation with Tate about which Chiefs we should be following.
The funniest part about that is all the Swifties realizing that this is a teammate of their fans.
Yeah.
But that's the year.
Yeah, well done to the Los Angeles Chargers for their schedule reveal.
I saw that.
That video.
By the way, the schedule releases are they're interesting. Like the way the NFL's made a show of them, and coming out this week, the week a lot of the college ones are. I'll give the NFL credit though. Like it's much more fan friendly. I mean, we're sitting here on May 16th, and we don't know the kickoff times of probably.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame typically are spoiled that way.
They typically are, but just college in general. I mean, these games generally are not in big cities. They require a lot of foresight and planning to get to. At least with the NFL, like everything now. There'll be 1 or 2 flexes at the end, but
it's time to get back outside with Robeck, one of our favorite brands at the Independent. Whether it's polos, Q-zips, vests, crew necks, or hoodies, Robeck is our go-to apparel when it comes to the golf course, gym, sitting around the fire, or even recording a podcast. You've seen Robeck sponsor former Notre Dame athletes Audric Estime, Kyle Hamilton, and Michael Mayer. And if you've attended a Notre Dame game, you've surely seen the Shamrock Polo around tailgates and in the stands. Robeck goes by the motto, crave activity, and there's no better apparel to fit those needs. Listeners of The Independent can get 20% off your first purchase by using the promo code IRISH at robeck.com. Again, that's 20% off all hoodies, polos, Q-zips, and more on your first order with the promo code IRISH. Visit robeck.com.
If Notre Dame is in the playoff and hosting a playoff game, it'll be either the prime time on Friday, December 20th, or one of the 3 games on Saturday, December 21st.
It's my understanding that they would not be the Friday game.
I have no inside info on this. I would just imagine winter in South Bend.
You can go straight from finals to the stadium.
Hey, I mean, it would be pretty cool, especially if they're hosting a team from down south. I mean, as Notre Dame always says, like, be nice if we get USC at night at the end of the year. The way we got to go there at the end of the year. But I say all that to say the NFL schedule release, they have an NBC game at 1 that Saturday, a Fox game at 4:30 that Saturday. Both those games will be going up directly against probably 2 college football playoff games. And what should be a great celebration of the sport in the first weekend of the first year of the 12-team playoff era with games on campus, which makes it that much more special, in my opinion. And people obviously watch them still, but the ratings for that are going to be very interesting because nothing gets in the way of the NFL.
Yeah, and it's
good games, by the way, like Steelers, Ravens, Chiefs, I think Texans.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. Is it's not like it's Vikings, Jaguars. These are games that I would frankly want to watch.
Right.
But I'll probably be covering a playoff game instead, which is fine.
Ooh.
No complaint. I need to be covering a playoff game that weekend. But yeah, I don't know. The playoff dynamics for Notre Dame, they have to be in it. I think that they will be in it. Will they go 11-1 or 12-0 or 10-2? I'm not sure. They just need to go to one of those 3. They need to have one of those 3 records, and they need to be in the playoff. And I think that if they're not hosting, it would be disappointing. Making it is fine, but they need to host a playoff game, which that's where you probably need to be 11-1 to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're being unreasonable at all in saying that's an expectation for this year's team with this year's schedule. I won't go so far as say I don't see how they could go worse than 10-2 because we've seen crazy stuff happen, but they can't go worse than 10-2 this year. They can't. And no, they win that first one. they should probably go at least 11-1. I think everyone gets a mulligan for the most part. And the beauty of the expanded playoff for Notre Dame is you do get that like everyone else now. But yeah, they should be a top 8 team at the end of the year, which would mean they're hosting a playoff game, and that would be awesome.
Yeah. We could talk briefly before we get some ACC conference politics to discuss, but I had a story on The Athletic this week about Matt Jansen, Notre Dame's head of scouting. Enlightening guy to talk to. I really enjoyed sort of the interview / conversation with him about scouting, how it works. I don't think his role, somebody asked in the comments if this is like a new role where Marcus Freeman is trying to push the program forward. I think this is a role that happens everywhere. And Matt said as much in my interview with him, but it was just sort of interesting to sort of talk about the way he goes about the job and like why that job is important, and also how that job's changed. I mean, we talked about when he got to West Virginia in 2019, like scouting for the transfer portal wasn't quite yet a thing, and now it is like the big thing. And just sort of how the volume of lists of players that he has. I joked with him afterwards, like if he ever wants to do a scouting 101 class for the media, like I'd be one of his first signups for it. But yeah, just an interesting guy who's kind of behind the scenes of people who are already behind the scenes at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting story. Again, I think every program has a person or people who do this, but the level of detail which he went without giving away any family secrets and what you were able to get out of him, I thought was very fascinating read, because I don't think it takes a very unique personality to do that job. I mean, obviously everyone working there loves football, but you've got to be a football junkie to the nth degree to essentially lock yourself in a room and just watch tape of hundreds, if not thousands of players from here on out. And, you know, it's one thing to scout high school players you might be interested in. It's another to advanced scout opponents you're going to be playing. But, you know, I like the way you led in the story, which was, hey, Notre Dame got these guys out of the portal and they weren't looking at them blindly. They knew these were their targets because Matt Jansen was scouting all these players for months on end, thinking they could end up in the portal and that they could be fits for Notre Dame. It'll be, you know, the interesting unsaid part of that. And, you know, I think we all, you know, have a level of intrigue is like, you know, so who wasn't a fit for Notre Dame, right? Like that's always the interesting part. Like who went in the portal that maybe caught your attention and you looked into him further and thought maybe he doesn't fit here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it would, I didn't get into this with him, but I think it would be a curious conversation if you could have it sort of off the record about like the UCLA offensive tackle who went in the portal, who was like, I think a full year starter. What about him was just like sort of not, I think Bruno Fina is his name. Like what about him was like not good enough for you? And I did talk to him about offensive line recruiting. He said that, you know, the two hardest positions to find in the portal are defensive line and offensive line. And I said, well, at Notre Dame, that's got to be offensive line probably by a wide margin because of how well it's recruited here. And he's like, yeah, it's you're trying to find guys in the portal speaking about offensive linemen that sort of fit the tradition of what's been established way before I got here. Because you need people who can kind of uphold that a little bit. Whereas defensive line, I feel like you play more than 5 guys. Yeah. You'd love to play 10. And I don't think Notre Dame's defensive line room isn't like the prestige room of all prestige rooms the way that I think that it is for offensive linemen. So it'd be interesting to sort of look at a player who like, you're like, okay, well, this guy had experience. Like, why isn't he good enough? And just like actually get a detailed opinion of why he wasn't. But yeah, that would be that'd be good off the record film review with somebody like Matt.
If you ask Brian Kelly, maybe they just cost too much on the defensive line.
Yeah. It sort of gets back to the whole like Notre Dame's willing to spend, like, you know, Javonte Jean-Baptiste last year, RJ Oben this year. Doesn't seem like it's much of an issue at Notre Dame.
Hey, they got Brian Kelly just signed a kid from a transfer from Grand Valley State, and I'd love to just see the smirk on his face when that fax came in, because when else would a guy who's probably the greatest coach in the history of Grand Valley State get to recruit a Grand Valley State player to a program like LSU.
Yeah.
That is the beauty of the portal, though. I will say, there are hidden gems everywhere.
Right. I think it's pretty rare. I mean, you get the Jared Verse from Albany to Florida State. That's the exception, though, right? Like
first round pick from Albany to.
You got when you move up a level, it is tough. It is tough to do. So it'll be Grand Valley State at LSU. That's a hell of a move. We'll see how it works out. You are not at ACC meetings down in Amelia Island. You typically have gone. I think that's where we did a Mike Bray interview from the pool there one time. Or you did the Mike Bray interview from the pool. I don't think I was invited. But the ACC Palace intrigue, it's relevant to Notre Dame since they're a member of the conference partially. I think it says something about how messed up things are in the ACC that they're going to go through an offseason and not have some big think piece about should Notre Dame be forced to join fully, because they have way bigger problems. You've got a much better read on that. How do you see this ending? And I guess, what do you think the impact is going to be for Notre Dame?
Yeah, I mean, second part first, I don't think Notre Dame's ultimately impacted by this a whole lot, at least in the immediate future. Even hearing Pete Bevacqua talk at the Rockme event, he said, on a microphone, he confirmed what we had been hearing, which is with the new NBC deal, Notre Dame is now ahead of the SEC is financially and just behind the Big Ten, which again is a great place to be. I mean, they've got the NBC deal, they've got the ACC TV deal for other Olympic sports. They're in a really good place, especially with the expanded playoff. The concern, I think, is if the ACC, as we know it, completely collapses. And I don't want to take a doomsday approach. I also don't want to be naive and rule anything out right now. David Hale at ESPN is tweeting from the USC board session now, I believe. Basically said that Bubba Cunningham's job is safe as the North Carolina athletic director. But certainly there's been a lot of barking from UNC trustees this spring. And I think it's not a coincidence that it's coming after Florida State and Clemson have tried to sue their way out of the league. And if you ask me, outside of Notre Dame, obviously, I think Carolina would be the biggest free agent out there if they were to leave the ACC. I think they could fit in the Big Ten or the SEC. The North Carolina market and state is the biggest that's not in one of those two major conferences right now. And, they've got a national brand. I just don't know what happens. I don't know what happens with Clemson, Florida State. I mean, I don't picture a scenario where the toothpaste goes back in the bottle and they come back to the ACC and everyone sings Kumbaya and moves forward. I just don't think that's practical, nor does it sound like anyone, based on their public comments, sees that in the best interest of anyone. Do 7 or 8 ACC schools get together and break off and form their own conference? I don't know. From Notre Dame's seat, that's what you're monitoring. Do we have a home for our Olympic sports? Because if we do, we're good. Right. If not, we got to start thinking strategically here. I thought it was interesting that Mike Krzyzewski spoke to Pat Forty this week for a story in the ACC, and he essentially said half the schools should combine with the Big East and form a super basketball conference that has some schools supporting football, not unlike the old Big East in its glory days. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't know the practicality of that. I don't know the appetite of that for a number of the ACC schools right now. For as much as we look at that TV deal as a financial drag, it's still ahead of the Big 12. And let's face it, the majority of that conference, especially the newcomers, probably likes that deal. I think Boston College probably loves it. You know what I mean? Like we're a part of the conference, we're getting paid. And there are a lot of schools like Boston College in that realm. And I think that's part of the unique and troublesome dynamic, at least currently with the ACC, is you've got big state schools like Clemson, Florida State, and North Carolina that are committed to winning at the highest level. And you've got, your smaller private schools like Boston College, Duke, Wake Forest. Obviously, they've all won different sports to varying degrees, but it's just a different makeup from a university standpoint.
Yeah, the sort of success formula that the ACC is trying to work with a little bit, it seems like a bit of a poison pill, but like maybe they're already swallowed so many that it doesn't matter.
It's kind of irrelevant now that the playoffs expanded, right?
Right. Yeah. it doesn't sound like there's enough money to be made up in other ways
No.
for the ACC and I've always been a little bit skeptical of this revenue gap being like the end all be all. Like in terms of paying coaches, we don't see a lot of assistant coaches jumping from like the second two Power 4 leagues to the top two Power 4 leagues. I wonder if that will change, but ultimately it's when we get to a point where the schools are paying players directly, then I think you've got a real problem. And I'm sort of coming around to on the point of like maybe Florida State, Clemson, and North Carolina have more of a point than I thought they did 5 years ago or 3 years ago or even 2 years ago when NIL felt like this sort of like third party venture. As soon as it becomes a line item in athletic budgets, then maybe you have a real problem if you're those other schools.
Yeah, I mean, I see where they're all coming from, and they've all taken different approaches, and I've found some to be less tasteful than others. I just don't know where they're going. Like the Big Ten, SEC are not running to grab Florida State or Clemson right now. I don't know. I mean, I think if Carolina was available, yes, they would try to get them in another school. But, I think prior to maybe this or the last football coaching cycle, you would see the revenue. You would see the revenue gaps rear its head, I think, in the Olympic sports. Because if you're a football blue blood, you're never going to spare an expense in football. Clemson's got one of the best facilities in the country. Dabo's making as much, I think, as anyone other than Kirby Smart. Like, Clemson's still paying top-level football. Mike Norvell just signed a 10-year extension, say, at Florida State. You see it where SEC basketball coaches are making a lot more money than the ACC basketball coaches. And the ACC is a quote-unquote basketball conference, and the SEC isn't. You see it in those Olympic sports. That's where I think you're seeing tangible differences that are not sustainable. But I do think you're starting to see, and a recent example, just because I talked to him recently, was Kurt Signetti. Like, why'd you go to Indiana? Like, it's not exactly a football school, and you've probably had other options throughout your career. And he's like, it was in the Big Ten. If you're in the Big Ten, you can win. And I think, the translate version of that is like, you're safe or you're not. You're in the Big Ten, the SEC, or you're not. Now, I think the next level to that conversation 5-10 years from now is, okay, if you're a bottom school in the Big Ten or the SEC, I think the same way the Big Ten and the SEC are essentially saying, why are we waiting for the ACC and Big 12 to agree with us? We can do whatever we want because we've got more money and power. I think the next step to that conversation is like the Alabamas and Ohio States of the world saying, why are we doing stuff? Why are we making the same amount of money as Indiana and Vanderbilt? We can call our own shots. And we're not there yet, but I could see a day in the not too distant future where that is reality. So, whenever I'm sure you get asked on every radio show and podcast you ever go on, what's going to take for Notre Dame to join the conference, or will they ever join a conference? And my answer is never in this current iteration. If we get to a place 5 years from now where there's a 30-team Super League, they'll join that. And I don't know if that counts as joining a conference or not, but they would be a part of that conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely with that. But it does feel like, not that the waters are calm in college sports, but Notre Dame's position and footing is very stable right now. Not just because they're spending, which we talked about at the top of the show, but just like the dynamics of access to the playoff, home for Olympic sports, and obviously the deal with NBC, which is very, very significant to the keeping it all knitted together. But we should probably wrap up on James Rundell, how Notre Dame replaced both Sam Hartman and Bryce McPherson with one person.
Efficiency. Interesting story. His father was a legendary, I did a lot of research on this. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert, but was a legendary Australian rules footballer and coach and commentator. I spoke to James shortly after he committed. Like all Europeans, much more mature than us. And obviously he's older. He's 23. But most importantly, he's 6'6", 225. I mean, if punting doesn't work out, I'm sure Al Golden or Max Bulla can train this guy to be a nasty MFer as a linebacker.
I would say, like, if those don't work out, our friend Guh at ESQ Clothing could probably get him to do some modeling.
It's going to be interesting. Like, people are going to be paying. Good year for Notre Dame punters. Pete Bevacqua gets the athletic director job. James Rendell is coming to save the day on special teams for the Irish. He's supposed to arrive late May, I believe. I'm always fascinated by it from a standpoint of, like, you didn't even play the sport X months ago, and now you've got a scholarship to play at maybe the most famous program in the country. Pretty cool deal. Not that he didn't earn it. It's just interesting. But him and everyone I talked to all said, like, yeah, Tory Taylor's the model for us, right? He, I think, was 26 when he graduated Iowa this year. Got drafted in the 4th round, if I'm not mistaken, by the Bears.
Chicago Bears, right?
Yeah, my Chicago Bears. I guess. I mean, everyone's got Bears fever this time.
I guess. Yeah.
Notre Dame fans who are Bears fans, I'm curious how they feel about Caleb Williams. There was a Reddit thread about that last week. But yeah, it adds a level of intrigue, I think, to Notre Dame's punts, the same way Sam Hartman had a level of intrigue with a certain audience to Notre Dame's quarterback play last year. But again, 6'6", 225 as a punter. Like, I'm sure he knows how to tackle, but I can't wait to see him lay someone out. And I can't wait to see the first person to mistakenly think they can get by him in the open field, because he's not your average punter, at least from a size standpoint.
Yeah, I want to see a sort of a side-by-side with him and Reno Monteforte, the long snapper, who's, I think, 5'7".
It'll be like that Aaron Judge, Jose Altuve side by side.
Yeah. That. And then will they blast "I Will Always Love You" in an Australian accent at the end of the season?
They'll just play the Bluey theme.
Yeah, there's plenty of options for the video board with James Rendell. So it will add a layer of intrigue and good-lookiness to the season that already had quite a bit going for it.
I don't know if you saw it. I was just thinking about it when you talked about the video board. Devin Hester just got into the Hall of Fame. It's the first punt returner.
Your Chicago Bears.
Yeah, clearly. My Miami Hurricanes. He did an interview, I think it was with Jared Payton, fellow Hurricane, when he got inducted, and it went viral. And it was just like the most amazing quote I've ever seen. It was something along the lines of, like, during kickoffs and punts is when the fans get up to go to the bathroom. And I changed the game so much I made you hold in your bladder every time I stepped on that field. James Rendell is going to do the same for Notre Dame's punting.
It'll be fun to see. All right, we'll wrap it up there. I think this will probably be our last podcast for. Maybe we'll pick up at it after Memorial Day, since knock on wood here, it's a bit of a slow time around Notre Dame. But summer should be interesting. Hopefully, we'll have some good guests coming up for some June podcasts. But until then, he's Matt. I'm Pete. Thanks for being with us on the latest episode of The Independent.